Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, Courtney, because she's on the West Coast, and other students are in different areas of the world as well. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome you all to our accounting alumni panel and career conversation. I'm Kara Primrose. I'm the Director of Career Services at the Whitman School, and I also am the undergraduate accounting career advisor. So it's near and dear to my heart to be working with this group, and Christine Waby works with our graduate students, and wanted to say hello to everyone. She's actually out on maternity leave right now, and I spoke with her yesterday. So what I'm going to do is we'll set up a few ground rules, just kind of process flow. So as I mentioned, if our students and participants could have your microphones muted for now, encouraging videos on, just again so we can see faces and reactions. We want to make this casual and conversational. I'm going to ask some questions of our panelists to kind of steer the beginning of the conversation. But students, participants, please be thinking about questions you have coming into the session or things you hear during the session you want to follow up with. As far as asking questions, you can either type them in the group chat or you can do the raise your hand feature. Oops, okay, when we get to that more Q&A session in the end. So I'm going to actually start by handing it over to our four panelists, and I want to thank them very much for taking their time to be with us today. I'm going to have you introduce yourselves because you all have really rich, interesting backgrounds and diverse from each other. So I would love to hear it in your own words and kind of give students the perspective to frame up the conversation. So I'm actually going to start with Courtney Blum. If you can just introduce yourself, a bit about your background, your thoughts on getting started in accounting, and a little bit about your path just to frame up your background.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Blum, as Kara said. Thank you for having me today. It's early. I'm in California, and so I'm happy to join you and spend my morning with you this morning. So I started at PricewaterhouseCoopers 17 years ago after I graduated from Syracuse. I did my internship with PwC when I was at Syracuse, and I started in the New York City office. So I spent a couple of years in New York City in the assurance practice there. And then after that, I moved to Boston. So I spent a couple of years in Boston, again with PwC, and focused on technology companies in Boston. And then I moved to New Jersey, where I was in our national office at PwC, focusing on Securities and Exchange Commission filings. And then after that, I moved 4 years ago to San Jose, California. So I've been here again with PwC. I'm a partner at the firm now, and I focus on audits of technology companies. So personally, I live with my husband here, and he's also from the East Coast. We keep ties to Syracuse, and my family is about an hour outside of Syracuse, so I visit there quite often. My husband works at Facebook. He's an engineer, and so we've both been working from home for the past several months. So it's been kind of an interesting time, both personally and professionally. So happy to talk to all of you, provide any advice that I can and answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Courtney. And I think you bring up a lot of important points. I definitely want to talk more about what it's like working virtually and making those transitions as well, because that's certainly something we get a lot of questions from students about. Dan Kinney, I'd like to go to you next if you'd answer the same question with an introduction and a run through of your background.
Sure, thanks, Kara. And good afternoon, good morning to everybody on the call. Looking forward to the conversation today. I graduated from Whitman back in 2010 with my graduate and undergraduate degree. I got a master's in accounting. I could definitely relate to everybody on the phone because when I was a junior, we went through the financial crisis. So having to kind of pivot and go through an economic downturn and feel that pressure is one of the things that led me to accounting. I was actually a finance and marketing major and then went to something that was at the time a little bit safer to get a job. I interned at Ernst & Young when I was a junior in our audit practice and then got a full-time offer by the time I came back on campus in the fall, and then went to work for E&Y in their audit practice and spent 4 years there, focused on hedge funds, primarily hedge funds and private equity funds in the asset management space. After about my fourth year, give or take, for better part of 4 years, I switched into our accounting advisory group and became a subject matter expert on 3 or 4 different technical accounting areas. And so what I was responsible for was helping our clients think through complex transactions and the financial reporting implications of that. So I did a lot of securitizations, IPOs, strategic transactions, M&A work, It was a really interesting experience. It was a great experience. It was very stressful because it was deal oriented. So constantly balancing 3 or 4 different timelines. I can see Courtney laughing, so I'm sure she definitely appreciates that from the national office side. And then 4.5 years in, so I got promoted to senior manager, spent a few months there, and then ultimately left E&Y to join Wheels Up, where I'm the assistant controller. I've been with the company for 18 months. When I joined, we were 250 people, give or take employees. We've done 4 acquisitions in 18 months, highlighted by, we acquired Delta Private Jets, which was a wholly owned subsidiary from Delta back in January. We're now up to 1,800 employees. And so we're kind of knee deep in integration work. But because I joined when we were small, it gave me an opportunity to kind of have a hat in both the accounting side from the true controllership role, as well as from the FP&A side, going through diligence and the integration. So it's been a rewarding experience leaving, but definitely different, and looking forward to kind of share some of that views and insight.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you have like parallel experiences, right? The smile of like, oh, yes, that's familiar. So you may even have questions for each other, topics you want to chat about. I'm going to go to Ashley Toms next. If you could please do your introduction.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I graduated Whitman in 2014 undergrad, and then I stayed on for my master's of accounting, graduated in 2015. So I interned with General Electric my summer after sophomore year, summer after junior year. I was accounting and finance undergrad. I didn't really know which path I wanted to go. And at the same time, I was doing like the Big Four leadership program. So I had done one for KPMG, and then I decided to stay on for my master's in accounting, and I interned with KPMG the summer after my undergraduate year. So going into my master's, I had a full-time offer. I interned and started in the real estate tax practice in New York City. I stayed within the tax practice for about 2.5 years. And then I really wanted to try something else to really diversify my skills, because tax was very, I really wasn't exposed to much else with tax. It was very tax like only. So I transferred to the advisory side, and I was in management consulting for another 2 years. So that was specifically the financial management consulting side. So we went to different clients, and it was really about trying to help them make their finance processes more efficient. My screen just moved over. So I did that, and then I wanted to try something outside of Big Four. So I actually recently just started a different job in April. So I've entirely started this job virtually, and I'm now at NBC Universal. I'm a senior analyst with their ad sales finance. So the advertisements on the digital side. So when you're watching an ad, like a show online, like we're kind of like helping with the revenue side of all of those advertisements. And so that's kind of transitioning to where, the entertainment world is going with all the different streaming services out there. NBC actually just launched their own last week. It's called Peacock. So yeah, I really was looking for a new experience, but it also ties back to my accounting background, because I still have the traditional accounting duties to do. So we have like a quarterly close, we have a budget that we have to do. So yeah, it's kind of tying my interest with accounting.
Great, thanks, Ashley. And Ian Thompson, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hi everyone, welcome. I grew up in New York City. I'm one of 4 brothers that attended Syracuse. We actually all attended at the same time at one point in time. We all came through Whitman. 2 of us are accountants. One is in HR and the other one's in IT. Unlike the other panelists, I actually went straight into corporate America. I did not go the public route. So I started from the bottom up. I started out as a senior accountant and worked my way through the organization. From there, basically, after 9/11, we combined our credit department, which is AR, and the financial analyst, and came up with the accounting manager position, which then I became that, and oversaw all the invoicing, credit management, did a lot of ad hoc stuff, bank reconciliation, things like that. And then we went into acquisition mode, and we started acquiring companies. And one of the first companies was based out of Toronto. I became the controller for that division. You know, we actually were remote. We left them in Canada, and I was the controller from here remotely, but would visit them occasionally. We had a staff up there. Eventually, we integrated them into us and rolled their APAR into our organization here. I actually live in Georgia now, but from there, we continued acquiring companies. So I then became the group controller for multiple divisions. They all had their own division controller, but they all reported into me. Basically, I ensured that they were compliant with our corporate policies, and I oversaw that, as well as just reviewing their monthly financials, asking questions, talking to the division presidents, working on strategy, things like that. I spent most of my career at the same company in that role, and recently I moved over to the FP&A side of the business, which is more acquisitions. You know, is one of the main things. My goal for this year, I have to find several companies that we can acquire, and from the start to finish, meaning, you know, you go through the courting phase of meeting the company, talking to the managers, seeing what they're willing to do as far as the sale of their company, and then you go into LOI, a letter of intent, and then you go into due diligence phase, and then you go into the actual acquisition and then integration. We actually just executed a LOI this week, so I'll be busy in the coming weeks doing due diligence, and you know, it's fun. And the reason I migrated more away from the actual day-to-day controller type functions is I actually enjoy doing the acquisitions. I like meeting people. I like learning about companies, what they do, and see if they're a good fit for our organization. You know, I'm looking forward to the discussion today. And like I said, welcome aboard, everyone, and turn it back to you, Kara.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I know for me, listening to that, my huge takeaway is accounting can take you in a lot of different directions, right? It's such a strong foundation, and really doesn't then just set you up for one path. And I think that's exciting. And I think it's something that maybe people don't always think about when they're looking at, you know, what their major is and where they start their career. So I would love to kind of take it back to the beginning, you know, take yourselves back to your college experience, and anyone that wants to pipe in from the panelists on this, did you know you always wanted to pursue accounting? Did you understand what it was? Like, how did you actually choose it as a major? And was it what you expected it to be? So you want to go ahead for that one, Ian?
Yeah, I'll take that one on, because it actually in high school we had accounting classes and business classes, and one of my first business class, the teacher said, you know, we're going to go through the business cycle from start to finish, right? And I said, okay, you know, he said, what do you think the two professions are that you need to hire when starting business? I said, I don't know. He said, well, it's an accountant and a lawyer. I said, oh, okay. He explained the lawyer has to set up the corporation, and the accountant has to start the balance sheet and get the book started and everything. So then he said, you know, what if we're going to dissolve a company? Who do you think the last two professions they're going to fire? I said, oh, okay. I don't know. He said, well, a lawyer and an accountant. You need your lawyer to dissolve the entity, and you need your accountant to close the books. So I said, you know what? I got to be one of them, at least. So that's actually why I went into accounting. I actually love math. I love the logic of it. Accounting is a principle. And once you get the fundamentals of that, it becomes easy to you. And I just enjoy solving problems. And every day you run into problems. I'm sure the panelists will tell you, you know, we run into issues every day, and the challenge is to solve it, right? And once we solve it, that's the happiness we get. And that's what keeps me driving in accounting. I love to solve problems, and that's what I'm here for. So
it's satisfying when you get that answer, right? That's awesome. Courtney, what were your thoughts on entering into the field?
Well, I was going to add on to what Ian just said, actually. And one of the key points in there is that nobody at a company gets paid without an accountant either. So if you want to get paid, you got to have an accountant. So that was very well summarized from beginning to end. And you're right. That is at least what I see at the companies that I've advised. Certainly, I've advised companies from the very startup phase right through their initial public offering, and then some through bankruptcy. And to your point, Ian, the first person in and the last person out the door is usually an accountant.
Yep.
And so they do get to see a wide variety of things from a business perspective too, even outside of just, crunching numbers. So from my perspective, accounting is in my genes. My father was an accountant; he was a controller, and so I grew up, watching him as a controller. See all aspects of business, very much similar to what Dan and Ian described in terms of their daily life today. It's not just crunching numbers; it's all aspects of business. You get to see, hiring of people. You get to see the budget for selling and marketing. You get to see, financial planning and analysis. There's every aspect of the business you get to see. And so I was completely fascinated by that. And I thought it was important for me to grow up to be a controller, and just seeing that and seeing what my father got to see at the company he worked for. So I came into school wanting to be an accountant at Syracuse, but then I decided to dual major with the I-School. And I really enjoyed that, and really enjoyed just something different. And I loved learning about IT, and I I was in the Women in Technology group there, and I loved it. And I actually debated before I left Syracuse which path to take. And what I liked about, the accounting entrance and particularly going to PwC was that I felt that I had the opportunity that even if I wanted to switch out of accounting, and do our what we call our risk assurance program, which is more focused on IT. If I wanted to do IT auditing, or if I wanted to go do something else at a company, I could easily switch. But I can tell you it wasn't an easy decision for me when I left Syracuse. But the reason I went for accounting was that it was around 2010, similar to what Dan mentioned. And seeing the economy at the time, I felt there was a lot of job stability in accounting, and the ability and flexibility to switch if I wanted to later on. So that's kind of how I ended up accounting. But then I never left 17 years later. So.
Options though. Ashley, I remember working with you when you were a student and your debate about what direction to head in. Can you chat with the group about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So I wasn't sure specifically if I wanted to do finance or if I wanted to do accounting, but when I decided that I wanted to stay on for my master's, I thought that I already had, gone through all the coursework with accounting for undergrad, and it was only a 1-year master's. So I was like, I think if I do it now, I know I'll do it, and to go back and have to do it later, I'm not sure if I would have done that. And I figured finance was something that I could really kind of go into at a later point, but I thought that accounting was really just a really great foundation. And it really is the foundation of business. So I wanted to continue with that, and then see where it took me. And then I also didn't know going in if I wanted to do accounting. You have to do all of the regular, like accounting 151 and like the regular like preliminary accounting classes. And then I started to notice that I was doing well in them. And I also, the same thing, like solving the problems, getting the right answers on the tests. And I was like, whoa, I guess I'm actually kind of good at this. So I continued on. So, but it also was always a challenge too. Like as you got to the upper level accounting classes, like if it's still the same numbers, but like 356, 357, like your actual financial accounting, those courses are hard, and just staying with it. And I always was someone that always went to office hours and really like to help me understand. But once you kind of understand the foundation, it can take you anywhere. So I think that it was a great major to start with, and I'm happy that I continued with that path and stayed on for my master's.
Now, talk to us a little bit more about the switch you recently made, because that shifted your focus, I would say, though you're still having an accounting part of your role.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about, that at this stage in your career.
Yeah. So I knew that I had an interest in entertainment, and the clients that I was on for when I was in tax, it was financial services, and then I was on more of the commercial side in when I was on the advisory side. But I I I really just like wanted to tie in both of my interests and really see something different. So I attended. We had like the Whitman on Wall Street thing in January. So I connected with an alumni there that works at NBC, and then kind of took it from there. So just really um, the connections that you make from alumni and just from your involvement, even that you're all attending this session over the summer, shows that um, you're you're eager and willing to put the time in to get an internship or to learn more about accounting. So yeah, it wasn't. It was a little difficult because I didn't have ad sales experience, but they kind of said to me, a lot of the people that had started there, they had started at Big Four. So they kind of said, I know that you have a good foundation of job experience, and ad sales is something that you can really learn on the job. So that wasn't really a factor in terms of like making it hard, I guess, for me to get the role. But I just am eager to learn. I'm still new. I just hit like the 90-day mark. So just learning all the ad sales like terminology and everything within the world of entertainment and media is new for me. But just being a sponge and learning, and I've started virtually. So it's been interesting because I haven't met a lot of the people that I'm working with, but everything can be done still from home. We closed the second quarter from home. I think this whole thing has shown us that like you can adjust with the changing times. And going off of, I know Courtney said she had another major in the I school. I think that's really cool. I think that's definitely a great compliment to having an accounting degree as well. I didn't do that, but I think that sounds like a great combo to kind of have that IT side and then accounting as well.
Absolutely. That's something employers tell us quite a bit is iSchool, double majors, business analytics, data analytics, especially as those fields grow, and being able to solve problems, not knowing all the answers and being able to handle ambiguity and be flexible. I mean, we've all had to show that in these last few months. It's definitely something employers are focusing on as that raw material of your work ethic and what you can do starting from your foundation. Dan, I'd love to hear your perspective. I know you just took a sip of water, so feel free to finish that. But I want to hear kind of your walkthrough of like, how did you make the initial decisions to pursue accounting? Where was your foundation from, and did that perspective change as you actually got into it?
Yeah, as I alluded to, I was a junior back in 2009, and so as the market was kind of in 2008, as the market was tanking, I was still kind of undecided. Did I want to do the finance marketing? I came with a lot of credits, so I knew I could have even triple major at Whitman, because I know how easy it is to kind of add majors. So I thought about that approach. And then, the market tanked, and my dad was an accountant. He was a partner at a regional firm. And so when I went to Syracuse, I was like, I'm not going to do that. And then, of course, that's what I ended up into. But, for me, it alluded kind of what Ian and Courtney mentioned. I knew it was a way to make sure that you can get a job out of school, which I always thought was kind of the number one priority to go to a school like Syracuse. And, I felt like there was a lot of flexibility where you can start and you can think about, especially if you join a bigger company, a Big Four company, you can rotate within the groups very easily. You could always go to the advisory side if you wanted to. You could transition and go to an MBA. Because again, they're very willing to hire Big Four accountants because they know that you're very easy to place after the MBA. So it's a good complement to start there. And just having an accounting background, what I've noticed is that now that I've joined Mills Up, it's given me a leg up on some of the financial analysts at the company, because not only do I understand math, I get the numbers, I can think through all the models that they're putting together, but I also have a very strong understanding of how is this actually going to impact financial reporting. And at the end of the day, at times I think some CFOs are, lose sight of what the balance sheet and the income statement look like, but they still care what the numbers look like and how the results are going to matter. And we're a pseudo tech company, and so we have a SaaS-based or membership-based model. And so just understanding how different changes to the products that we're offering to our members and to our customers, how that really impacts the revenue, and then ultimately EBITDA, is such a huge benefit to understand all of that and the debits and credits. So it's really kind of set me up, and even though I started from the financial services side when I was at E&Y, so I never even understood SaaS, having the ability to think logically and understand how the accounting works, you can really then become very tangible, and you can get placed into different industries and really hit the ground running very quickly, as long as you can think about logically, well, what is the accounting trying to get to? What is the gap? What do you think the gap answer is? And while sometimes you get some weird answers, for the most part, it does match up to logic.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. So as you've been talking, I'm hearing a lot of phrases, about audit, tax, advisory, controller, that sort of thing. And some of our students may not be as familiar with what that all means. So I would love if you could, I'm just going to mute here, if you could maybe talk about your day-to-day, like what does it mean to work in advisory? What does a controller do? And I know you've shared some of that, but I think sometimes one of the most common questions I get from students is, okay, I want to go public accounting and it's audit or tax. There's so much more than that, right? It's not all public accounting, though that's a great place to start. That's not the only option. Audit and tax are not the only option, but how do you make those decisions? So maybe we'll start with you, Courtney. Just kind of that day-to-day, like what are you doing in your role that would be helpful for students to understand the field a bit more?
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about what I did coming right out of school,
Perfect.
if that's okay, Kara, and then I can talk about it, which is very different than what I do today. But
great.
Certainly coming right out of school, and I did go into audit, right, and I did go into a Big Four. So and I can tell you, not every Big Four is equal, and not every audit team is equal, even within the Big Four. So my day-to-day, at least starting out, was certainly coming in with continuous learning. The Big Four, I think, come in and you're continued to be trained, and you learn about the firm, and you learn about audit methodology, and you kind of further expand what you learned in college. So there's a lot of learning in that first couple of years, which I think is super important. And then we at PwC and also the other Big Four usually bring in a large class of new hires. And so you're typically with a peer that just came out of school too. And so it's a nice, comfortable group, I think, to enter into, whatever accounting firm you go to, but it's a nice, very comfortable entrance into the workforce. And so day to day there, I was going out to clients. And so that was a little bit different than, just, going into the industry where you're going to the same office every day. Entering, the audit practice, I was going out to a different client, every other day, different offices with a different team, with a different supervisor. And so I learned very quickly how to adapt to different leadership styles, to different clients and their views and their personalities and how they tick. So I started to really study people in the first 2 years. So obviously I was certainly learning more about my job and the technical aspects of accounting and the industry I was working in, but then I was also studying how to work with people and how to present to them and how to get them on my side or how to ask them questions without being overbearing. And so that was my first couple of years of day to day, just really spending time with different people. And it was of course a little bit overwhelming, but truly I think helped position me for kind of later on in the career when I was actually leading the team and leading the client relationship, which is what I do now, and as a leader at the firm as well. So the first couple of years are very important, overwhelming. I think Dan mentioned stressful sometimes too earlier. That's a word, but certainly critical in positioning you for the next couple of years. The other thing that I think, Ashley mentioned a little bit in the end too, just, those couple years, those early years, and whether you go into a Big Four or you don't, learning that accounting base and that accounting foundation is critical. that language that you learn, both in school and that first couple of years of accounting, it's the universal business language. And to, Ashley's point of going into the ads industry and, Dan doing financial services at one point and now going into essentially a SaaS company, right? Very different industries, but that baseline foundation of accounting is fairly critical to really master. I went and got my CPA license eventually, but it's fairly critical to master that baseline. And then it allows you to, exactly what Ashley and Dan said, just go interact with anybody from virtually any company if you can think logically through it. And so that's helped me as I've continued at PwC serving clients in different industries, of different sizes and things like that. So the first couple of years are great.
Intense though, like you said.
Yes.
Ian, I'd love to go to you next. I know you shared a bit about your transition to your current role and why you made some of those decisions, but can you kind of fill in some of the pieces for us of what some of the day-to-day was as you've progressed through your career?
Well, I started out really heavily in the transaction. So, my day-to-day started out posting journal entries, reviewing what the system had posted the night before, making sure that, everything ran correctly. At one point I was calling customers when I was overseeing that area of the company, calling customers to collect cash. Everything. This is the baseline accounting. This is exactly what happens when you're in a company and you come straight out of school, and it's baseline journal entries every day, making sure things are posted correctly and prepare for your month-end close. Those are the key elements to when I first started doing bank reconciliation, all of those things. As I progressed, those things became a little less as other people started posting them, but my role became more on the review side of it, right? So I started reviewing all the transactions even more in detail and trying to understand why we have changes from month to month or year to year or quarter to quarter. That part of the business actually excites me. I like to review and understand the variance because that gives you a good picture of how you're performing from a profitability standpoint, once you understand the numbers and what they mean. And then as I continue to progress, again, it becomes less and less. And now I'm reviewing the high level financials. And, like for instance, acquisitions, I can now look at a balance sheet. I can pick apart a company within, 10, 15 minutes. I can understand, if it's a viable company or not. Just by looking at a few things, you can really see that. And my experience coming through the ranks, looking at a transaction has brought me to this point where it's almost natural for me to look at a balance sheet and pick it apart. And I can see where someone's trying to hide something, basically. So, because I've caught a lot of companies trying to fluff their balance sheet and, overinflate the cost, the value of their company. And when we make an offer that's lower than their expectation, they're wondering why. And when I point it out, they're like, "Oh, okay."
You caught that, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm part of a big company, part of Hunter Douglas Window Fashions. We're a global company. We're about 3.6 billion annually, and so we have what we call a peer review where different controllers or FP&A folks go to different divisions and actually audit their books. We're auditing our peers. And I found things at some divisions that, they're shocked that it's their slush fund, right? They're trying to play conservative accounting by hiding some funds in case, something unexpected happened. They can use it to offset their revenue, their profits for that time. So, I always find these things, and, now I don't do them. They don't want me to do them anymore. A lot of these controllers, they just don't want to see me there anymore. But, really, I actually took that progressive route of, from the baseline accounting, the day-to-day, transactional stuff all the way up to now. My day-to-day today, like I've been on the phone all day, all morning, actually, just talking about the due diligence process and what needs to happen in the next few weeks. So that's really my day-to-day today, whereas it was different many years ago. You know, I was really just in the system all the time, looking at transactions. Now, you know, I'll just print a report, I'll review it, and then move on. So.
Great. Thank you very much. Dan, I'd love to hear your perspective when you go back to the day-to-day in your career progression, you know, what, key skill sets and what were you actually doing as you progressed through?
Yeah, sure. And I definitely echo what Courtney mentioned and what Ian mentioned from the private side. You know, from an audit perspective, when you're starting, you do feel a little overwhelmed. You're going from client to client to client. But, you know, I think it's really important when you are at the staff level to take a step back and understanding why you're doing it and getting the big picture. And I think that really helped me, especially when I then moved from the audit side to the advisory side, because I actually understood what my clients did. I understood the industry, I understood the challenges. I thought it was really interesting what you mentioned, Kara, that there are a lot of different career paths when you go to a public accounting firm. It's not just audit and tax, but I always caution students, because I know, especially when I was at EY and we would come talk to students a lot, the advisory lines would be completely, way out the door. Nobody really wants to come talk to audit. And you ask them, well, what do you want to do in advisory? Or what do you think advisory does? And they don't really have a clue. And, the thing that I always try to stress to them is that, yeah, advisory has a really fun name attached to it, but it's not always as interesting as you think it is. Some of it is actually, like, I know we use consultants now at Wheels Up, and some of the work is just stuff that we don't want to do, or we think it's cheaper to outsource. And I think that's the truth of it. And the big four firms are hiring students to come do that. And not just the big four firms, a lot of consulting companies do that. So I think it's really important to think about what consulting you're actually doing and really fully understand it, as opposed to just saying, well, I'm going to do advisory and that's what I want to do because I think it's the most interesting. I think now currently what my day-to-day is, as I mentioned, kind of 50% of my time is that true controllership function. So what Ian mentioned, going through, looking at the transactions, putting together quarterly financial statements, monthly financial statements, keeping the books in order, so that we can close in a timely fashion. We now have 4 different legal subsidiaries, so kind of rolling them all up. And then the other half is on the analysis side. So right before this, the 12 o'clock call, we were going through and we're looking at one of our major vendors from an operations side, and how do we start to think about bringing that in-house? What does the financial model look like? And as we're thinking about the proposals that we're going to make to them to start to pare away from that, what are the financial implications of that? So it's a lot of thinking about with the analysis side of it, how do you support it? And then basically where are the risks? One of the things that I think really is important to develop as you make your way up the line, as you progress through your career, is understanding how to present data and decipher data. It's not as simple. Anyone, I don't want to say anyone, but it's easy to do the math and the calculations. The hard part is being able to explain it to somebody who's not in the details. And so I think that's one of the things that, as you start to work your way up, it doesn't matter whether it's private or public, developing that skill set is a really important tool to have in your kit.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Ashley, we'd love for you to walk through. I know you just talked about your recent transition, but I know you've worked in real estate tax and in advisory. Can you maybe talk about what those roles really entailed for you?
Yeah. So on the tax side, you're really, when you're first coming out of school, you're really in a preparer role. So kind of how Ian said, you kind of merge from preparer to reviewer. When you're first starting out, you're preparing tax returns, preparing tax extensions. So it's really just getting accustomed to what the tax code is that year, and knowing what the actual tax adjustments are when you're given the financial statements for the clients that you're on. Really interpreting the financial statements, making sure they foot correctly, and the proper tax adjustments are made, and just really getting used to the whole tax busy season schedule. So there's 2 busy seasons a year. So really from when you come back after when the new year starts, so like January through March or April, it changes based off of if you're working on corporations or partnerships. Their extensions are due at either March 15th or April 15th. And then most of your clients will be filing extensions because they won't have their final financial statement information at that time. And then the second busy season is around July through September 15th, because September 15th is 6 months from when you're filing your extension. So it is a little bit busier in the summer, because for extensions, there's a lot less involved in terms of the filing that needs to be done for that. The returns are a whole different story, and you have state returns, not just federal, and each state has their own form, and it gets very complicated. You wish that all 50 states just followed the same one form, but yeah, it was really learning the whole process, and I didn't know that much going into it. I had taken the tax class in school, but I think I'd only known from like a personal level for doing my own taxes, and but for corporations and partnerships, it's an entire different story. But then when it came to advisory, it's entirely like project based. So like you don't really have a set timeline of like, oh, this is the busy time that you're going to be busy. Like you kind of knew in tax, okay, it's this time of year I have extensions, it's this time of year I have filing for return. So really it's project based, and based off of that, you kind of are busy at different times. And same kind of thing, I think I was in the preparer role and the reviewer role. It's kind of like depending on what you're working on, but it was a lot different, because I wasn't using tax software anymore. It was more entirely like Excel. Used a lot more PowerPoint in advisory, which I did not use in tax at all, because we're making decks and presentations to the clients. And so I was able to kind of really use different skills in each practice, but I was still under the umbrella of KPMG. So it really was a cool opportunity, because I was able to see two totally different sides. And yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you. I got another question or two, and then I do want to make sure we have time for student questions. So students, if you do have questions, feel free to start typing them in the chat. You can send them either directly to me or to the group, and I'll read through those and ask them of our panelists. So you can go ahead and start doing that whenever you're ready. In the meantime, though, we're certainly in a very different environment in this virtual remote sort of work, and a lot of different things have come about because of that. Some challenges, some good things, allowing us to do these sorts of things. But I hear a lot of questions from students, especially as they're pursuing opportunities and trying to build their network, and, career fairs aren't going to look the same. What advice do you have for students that are trying to navigate understanding career options, making connections, even going through the formal recruiting process when they're not going to have face-to-face time in most cases? And I think those relationships are so critical. We're so fortunate to have such a robust recruiting program at Whitman that by the time you apply to that opportunity, the recruiter already knows who you are in most cases. Absent of that, right, and your own transitions to working remotely, just what advice in general do you have for students? And I'm going to go back to Ashley because she's still on my screen, so we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think since right now most of you are either like sophomores or above, so you've probably been able to experience a career fair or a different like career discussions and different career events that Whitman puts on. Hopefully you've been able to talk to some of the companies or talk to some of the recruiters. And definitely, I'm sure all of the events are going to be kind of probably similar to this, like a Zoom panel or something like this, just making sure that you are aware of all the different events going on. And I know the Career Center does a good job of emailing you and letting you know everything that's going on. I would just say to attend as many as possible as you can. If you can't attend one, I don't think it's going to make your name mud, but I think it's just great to continue those conversations. And yeah, I'm not sure how the whole recruiting process will change since this is the first time everyone is really going through this, but just making sure that you're involved and active and proactive. Like even if you want to reach out to a recruiter that you met and just like say, hey, could we set up a call to just catch up? Mm-hmm. Always staying on someone's radar is, I would say, the best advice.
Thank you. I know, and that's a great point too, that we're all figuring this out. The students, the candidates, the
Yeah.
professionals, the recruiters, career services. So I think giving each other some good grace, right, and having faith that we're trying to get this all figured out together, I think is an important perspective. Ian, what would you recommend? You know, yourself, you know, in that remote environment and how to connect with people, or just even as students navigate the process. What's some advice you have?
Well, you know, I stay connected to the university, and that's going to be the key through all of this, right? We have a big alumni network, and not just at Whitman, but throughout all of Syracuse University. So my suggestion is if you know a city you want to land in, try to see if there's a local alumni club around that you could connect with, and meet some of the alums. You know, there could be opportunities there, or they can introduce you to people that may not be Syracuse alum, but potentially have an opportunity for you. All right. So the key is to build your network and start now while you're in school, and continue it beyond that. You know, when I first moved to Georgia, the first thing I did was seek out the alumni club here. And I eventually became the president of the club for a few years, and really got involved with the university at that point. I assist Office of Admission. I help with some of the interview for high school students trying to get into Syracuse down here. I'm part of the regional council for Syracuse, which is made up of trustees, and actually the chair of the trustees, she actually lives in Georgia. So we spend a lot of time together, and we talk about what's going on campus, you know. So my advice is start building your network from now, and use Syracuse University as your platform, and not just in Whitman, but all of the universities. So reach out to alums. If you're planning to live in Georgia, reach out to alums here, reach out to me. There's a lot of alums here in Georgia. We have over 3,500 alums in the Metro Atlanta area. So, you know, that's the best advice I can give anyone. Build your network from now, and then when you decide to move somewhere, reach out to Syracuse alum in that area.
Absolutely. The power of that orange connection is just
Right.
amazing, amazing. Dan, I'm going to go to you next. Then we do have, and then Courtney, and then we have a couple of student questions. But whether it's related to virtual recruiting, but just, you know, as students navigate through their next steps, what would you recommend?
Yeah, it, you know, definitely echo the thoughts of Ashley and Ian, that you can't really be passive, especially now. I think before it was important not to be passive, and now probably even more so. You know, the one advice I always give students as you're trying to weigh what company, you know, don't devalue yourself. I mean, at the end of the day, the companies want you to work for them, and you want to try to find a good fit. And, you know, it's definitely going to be more challenging virtually. But, you know, for me, I always thought about it as, you know, if you're looking at a recruiter and you're looking at the folks who the companies are bringing up with them, there's usually a reason why. Those are the employees that are really passionate about the companies that they're working for. They're not going to bring somebody who is, you know, very sour and down. Like EY wouldn't bring, if I didn't like EY, I promise you when I worked there, they wouldn't have me come up to Syracuse. So of course I'm going to come and I'm going to sell you on how great EY is. But so it's really important then to try to connect with other people who aren't necessarily recruiters, who aren't on campus. I used to look at where the kids in the students in my classes, where they were applying and what companies they wanted to go work for. And I tried to get a sense of, okay, am I like them personality wise? Could I see myself sitting in a room with them and working on a project with them? And if I couldn't, then that was maybe a good tell that company may not necessarily be a great fit for me culturally. Because I think it's really tough, especially virtually, because the other advice I would say is when you're on interviews, try to go find somebody that isn't on the interview with, isn't an interviewee or an interviewer, or isn't part of the recruiting team, and try to talk to them, and just gauge faces. Obviously that's tougher now virtually. So that's probably one of the advice one piece of advice I'd give.
Thank you. And Courtney, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, much of the same. I think, you know, to Dan's point, I think taking advantage of the opportunities you have to have conversations. You know, I know we at PwC, when we're recruiting even now virtually, our interviews are virtual, which I agree is sometimes awkward, but you have to realize it's also potentially awkward for the person doing the interview as well. And so my advice is be yourself, and treat it as if it's in person. And then to the extent that an opportunity comes up to be able to talk to somebody else within an organization that you're interested in, whether it be, a Syracuse alumni, or a recruiter says, hey, why don't you talk to this person? Be proactive about it and take advantage of those opportunities. I can't tell the group enough. I'm actually, surprised to see how when we offer up our time to be able to talk, sometimes we don't get reciprocation back. And so I think some of that is just being shy and not wanting to take time out of people's day. But Kara, when we first started out this conversation, we talked about how much everyone likes to talk about themselves and what they do every day. And so if you realize that, then you shouldn't hesitate to ask others about what they're doing every day, what opportunities they might have for you, what advice they have. And I guarantee in every case, whether the person is shy or really outgoing, they're always going to talk. And so that would be the best advice, is just take advantage of those opportunities and don't hesitate to ask to talk to somebody if you're interested.
Absolutely. It certainly gets the conversation flowing really easily and really well. And even just the questions about that we've been asking today, like, how did you make these choices and what do you do? I mean, it's a personal conversation around, helping people learn about what their future may look like. We have about 8 minutes left, and I have a few questions from students, so I definitely want to turn it over there. The first question is from Allie, and she's asking, have you been asked, or do you ask, any technical accounting questions during an internship interview or interview for full-time? So I think kind of like, what is the balance between expectation of technical knowledge and those maybe more soft skills, work ethic, interpersonal skills? Any of our panelists want to grab that one?
I can.
All right.
I think for Big Four interviews, it was more behavioral and kind of seeing your personality and what clubs or leadership roles you might have been involved in on campus, and kind of telling them about yourself and how you would add value to the organization. But when I had interviews for GE, it was a little bit more on the technical accounting side. I think like I've been asked to break down like a journal entry, nothing super complex. And it was definitely like, if you need time to think about it, like you could say, I need a minute to think about it. I think it's better than just, kind of spitting something out and being wrong. But I think on that side, they wanted to see more of your thought process, less of if your answer was right or wrong. I remember walking out of that and I was like, I definitely like messed that up, and that wasn't a liability or that wasn't an asset. Like I just completely messed it up, but I ended up getting the internship offer. So I think just getting out of your head and trying to, I think it was like a depreciation question and like how it would be. So it was like debit, appreciation, credit, accumulated depreciation, like very simple. They weren't like making it complex, but just, trying to see your thought process there. So I think maybe on the finance side, it might be a little bit more technical, but Big Four, all of my experience was more behavioral questions.
Thank you. Any other panelists have thoughts on that or find that to be consistent?
Well, I think it depends on the level you're going in. Straight out of college, I think the expectation is you're still learning, and you won't get as many technical questions. But as you go up and you're trying to move into different roles in a different company than yours, then you will probably see some technical questions being asked. But at that point, you should know. You should be more comfortable with those transactions, those questions that's being asked. So.
Perfect. So it's a balance. And I think knowing a bit about what sort of role you're going into, of course, the company, that sort of thing. But I think a lot of companies are looking for especially right out of college, that like raw material, can you learn, show us what you can do, and it gets more technical as you go. But also being ready for anything, right? Go with the flow. The next question is from Bon, and it's asking, besides your internship experience during college, what kind of preparation characteristics do you think make an outstanding candidate in the application process? So what are you looking for? Maybe Courtney, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. A very good question, Bon. So thank you. And I think what, at least what I, personally look for, and I think what I see a lot of companies looking for is kind of, it's a very simple question of what have you done with your time? And it may not even be related to accounting. But just what meaningful thing have you done with the time that you've had, if you've had time, whether that be having other work experience, if you've done something interesting, if you haven't been able to, work even during the shutdown recently, right? What have you done during that time? Have you, taken an online course, or have you done something for the community, or, have you independently learned some new skill, right? And it might not, again, it might not even be related to accounting, but I think that says a lot about, to Ashley's point, what we look for in a good job candidate is behavior skills, ability to work with others, ability to take initiative for your own learning and for what you do every day. And so I think that's particularly important now, is just, making sure that if you do have time now, that you're making sure it's filled with something meaningful, either career driven or even not, but at least something interesting. And I would encourage you to tell your story about that, even on your resume. So your resume today might not be filled with, internships and job opportunity, job experience and all that stuff, but find a way to put that in your resume to tell your story about what you've been doing in your life. And I think that at least at a minimum in an interview translates to a very good conversation.
Great. And Dan, what are your thoughts on what makes an outstanding candidate?
Very much what Courtney mentioned and Ashley and Ian alluded to, being well-rounded, having things to talk about. The other thing I would just say is be prepared, know the company you're talking to. I always remember there was one student who we were up there to do like office hours or something, and there was like a line out the door, and we had an EY sign next to us. And, she asked me a question, and she wanted to ask, like, how was my time at EY, or why did I pick EY? And I literally looked at, she paused before she said the company, had to look at the sign, and then looked back at me, and then realized it was EY. Maybe she was nervous, but I always remember being like, you just waited online for an hour. You couldn't remember that you're talking to someone from Ernst & Young. So it just really just came off the really wrong way. So just kind of like knowing who you're talking to, why you're there, and being prepared and understanding the company, doing a quick Google search to see what's going on with the company, what news events, that's those are the low hanging fruit that you should be doing when you're going through your career process.
Awesome. Thank you. We have thank you from our audience members being shared in the chat as well. So we are almost at time, so I'm actually going to wrap it up there, though I'm sure there are many more topics we could talk about. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today and sharing your experiences and expertise. It is very much appreciated, and I learned some new things too, so it helps me. And then I'm sure it helped our students and guests and other folks that were here as well. So thank you very, very much. We will continue to have sessions like this into the school year, so please keep an eye out. And of course, for our panelists, we'll be calling on you again to participate in these sorts of activities. I do want to mention to the students there is an opportunity tomorrow to do some one-on-one conversations with alumni to continue the conversations. Those can be found in Handshake. They are accounting specific. There's a supply chain one as well, but that one is full. So we have a couple of spots available in the accounting one, and those are with Mackenzie Shine, who works at PwC, and Brett Aston that works at Deloitte. So good way to kind of continue the conversations and get their perspectives as well. So with that, I am going to wrap it up, and I want to give you all a great applause and appreciation for joining us today. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.